Welcome to TNR training, Identifying a Trap Location. I'm your host, Athena. This is just one video in a series designed to help new TNR volunteers with Campus Cats of Athens, Georgia. If you're not with Campus Cats, welcome anyway, and I hope this video is helpful to you as well. Just keep in mind that some of the specific references won't apply to your situation. Let's start with a question to get you warmed up. Which of the following is usually not a good trap location? On a sidewalk? Against a building or fence? Under a bush? Or next to a feeding station? I recommend for this quiz question and for the others in this series that you pause the video, think about your answer, and then push play when you're ready to see what it is. Did you choose on a sidewalk? That's the best answer for this question, because sidewalks are usually not the best locations for traps. They're too conspicuous to people going by, and they're usually too close to a road, and that makes them unsafe for cats, and in some cases for you as well. We'll start with why identifying a good trap location is important to the whole trapping process. Take a couple of minutes now to think about why identifying a good trap location is important for the trapping project. Pause the video while you do this and press play again when you're ready to move on. First, an ideal location is inconspicuous to people. You don't want to draw too much attention to what you're doing. Second, a good spot gives you the best chance at being noticed by cats quickly. And finally, an ideal location won't endanger the cats you're trapping or yourself. Here are the basic recommendations for choosing an ideal trap location. Take a few minutes now to think about what you remember from group training about the basics of trap location. What do you need to keep in mind when choosing your location? Where are good places to put traps in general? How do you know? What kinds of things could affect your decisions about where to put your traps? Pause the video while you do this and press play again when you're ready to move on. Putting the trap next to a feeding station makes it easily noticeable to the cats. A trap that is in or next to a travel route is also easy for cats to notice it. You also want the trap to be away from hazards to the cats and to yourself. Now let's talk about how to identify the feeding station. This is just where the cats are accustomed to getting food. Take a couple of minutes now to think about what you learned about feeding stations from the training session with Kelly. Where should you look for feeding stations? How do you know when you found them? Why is it best to use a container and feed in one spot rather than having food spread around on the ground? If a colony hasn't yet been conditioned to feed out of containers, they might be just eating from trash bags in a dumpster. If that's the case, then the dumpster is the feeding site. It's also possible that people are feeding cats by tossing food onto the ground in a general location. If this is the case, then that general vicinity is the feeding site. The best situation is when you or someone else has had a chance to get the colony used to eating out of a dish of some sort, so they come to one specific location. This is the best spot for your trap. You could also put traps in or near the travel routes that the cats use. So let's talk about where to find those next. Take a couple of minutes now to think about what you learned about travel routes from the training session. Where are common places cats like to travel? Why is knowing this valuable? Why would travel routes be good spots for traps? Cats like to travel along objects like walls, fences, or machinery that hasn't been moved in a long time, like the tractor with a tree growing up out of the engine block, that sort of thing. If there are lines of bushes or low trees near your feeding location, cats might also travel under these because they allow them to stay hidden when they're going from one place to another. In some cases, you'll see little paths worn in the grass or other vegetation that show you exactly where your cats are traveling. In any of these cases, these travel routes are also good places to put your trap. Next, let's talk about some locations to avoid when choosing a spot for a trap. Now, some of these might seem like common sense, but they're included anyway, just to be on the safe side. Take a couple of minutes now to think about possible hazards to avoid at trap sites in general. What are they? What makes them hazardous? Where are possible hazards at your specific trap site? You probably wouldn't put a trap in a road because that's an obvious danger, but I had to mention it. Even a road that seems unused could be the source of a nasty surprise if you put a trap there. It's best to avoid driveways on general principle, unless cats are used to being fed in one and you know for sure that cars aren't going to be driving into it. Railroad tracks are another dangerous place for cats and for you. Even if you don't think the tracks are ever used, it's better to keep traps away from them and not have to worry about being surprised by a train. Here are some additional things to consider related to choosing your trap location. Take a few minutes now to think about other important considerations when choosing a trap location in general. What are other considerations for your trap site in particular? Now these tips are all related to people because you're most likely to be noticed and approached while you set up your trap. Ideally, you would have spoken to neighbors or business owners before you started trapping, and this is discussed in another video, and you would have let them know when you were going to be trapping and that it's best that they don't come near the trap site during those times. But, just in case you didn't, bring some brochures, handouts, or business cards with you. Try to be as inconspicuous as possible by keeping your activities quiet. If you do attract someone's attention to the trap site, be polite, because we need allies, and briefly explain what you're doing and offer them a brochure or a handout or business card for more information. Now, some people might want to stick around to see the action after you've explained what you're doing. If this happens, I recommend explaining that the cats are terrified of people and that you won't catch them if there are people hanging around while you're trying to do the trapping. So consider inviting them to contact Kelly at a later date. Like I said before, give them brochures and other information so that they can learn about what you're doing, and if they're interested in volunteering later, fantastic. Basically, you want to try to shoo them away as gently as possible. Now let's look at a couple of examples of colony sites and identify some suitable trap locations at each of them. This is Site 1, and I'd seen a cat coming down that dirt road towards what I think was this abandoned mobile home where he'd been taking shelter and feeding nearby. So I wanted to give you a 360-degree view of this location so you can see that the mobile homes are part of a larger neighborhood. There's a big grassy area over here, another dirt road. You can see that some houses have privacy fences in their yards while others don't. That can affect how a cat travels through a neighborhood. So here we are again back at the beginning with that dirt road that I'd seen the cat traveling down. This is the same site from a different angle, showing the abandoned mobile home on the right. And I wanted to point out the mobile home on the left is the one that was putting food on the porch, so I think the cat was heading towards that as the feeding station. Remember that I'd seen my stray cat walking towards this abandoned mobile home from a neighborhood road located in that direction. In an ideal situation, I would have spent some time observing the colony site beforehand to identify travel routes and the feeding location. But in this situation, I wasn't able to do that. You aren't always going to have the time or the resources to do things the best way. And in cases like this, you have to evaluate the site and make an educated guess about where to put your traps based on what's there. The location of the 4 mobile homes, here, 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 and here, and some fencing right here, created a semi-enclosed space here. The food that I assumed my stray cat was heading towards was usually put on a porch in this direction at this mobile home. So my stray would have a few options of getting at it. On the one morning I'd seen this cat, he was approaching the mobile homes from the right in this picture, which is northwest on a map. To get into this enclosed area from that direction, he had 3 options. The first was to enter this yard and hop over the fence. My guess was that he wasn't going to do that though, because that yard was occupied by 4 yappy little dogs. My stray's other 2 options were to get to the food by either going underneath the abandoned trailer or coming around the side of it. Take about 5 minutes now while you look at the images of this colony site and come up with some suitable locations for traps. Think about why you would put them in some locations rather than others. Remember to consider everything you know about the site while making your decision. I know this is a lot to think about, but remember that you also want to try to be inconspicuous while you're trapping. Based on all the information I'd gathered about the site, including the locations of other homes in the neighborhood, I didn't want to put a trap at the corner of the mobile home here because it would be too visible to people in the homes in that direction. So I decided to put my traps inside the enclosed area here. Looking at it again, there are lots of good spots for traps. Next to the porch where the food was placed would have been one option, but I also wanted to watch the traps from my car, and it would have been difficult to see that spot from anywhere I could have parked. In addition, the family that lived there was home at the time, and I didn't want to risk the cat being scared away by sounds from inside. I finally settled on two spots, because I only had two traps. The first would be here, to try to get my cat if he came under the abandoned mobile home or around it like I already showed. And the second spot would be here, because this truck had been sitting on a flat tire for months. Remember that cats like to travel along objects in the landscape. This second spot was also blocked from the sight of the yappy dogs I already mentioned, which lived here. Finally, both of these spots allowed me to park nearby and watch the action. This is site number 2. You can see that there's a lot less going on here because this is the backyard of just one home. There's a view looking towards the front yard and the neighborhood road. There's a 6-foot privacy fence here extending along the entire length of one side of the backyard. There's another type of fence along the back of the property and a chain link fence on the other side, and I had seen the stray cat coming across the backyard to that porch where the feeding station was originally. Take 5 minutes now while you look at the images of this colony site and come up with some suitable locations for traps. Why would you put your traps in some locations rather than others? Remember to consider everything you know about the site while making your decision. As you saw from the 360-degree view in the previous video, Site 2 here is far less complicated than Site 1 because the property has just one house. I also knew more about what was going on at this site before I started trapping, so that made choosing my trap location a little bit simpler. The cat I wanted to trap was coming to the feeding station from the field behind this house and across the backyard from this direction. The feeding station had been on the back porch about 10 feet in that direction, and I moved it to this spot close to the corner of the house over the course of about a week. This spot was better because I wanted to keep the food and the cat hidden from the rest of the neighborhood, and it allowed me to do that, but putting the feeding station here also allowed me to get the cat used to eating in a spot where I could put a trap and watch from my car during my trapping session. We talk about observation during trapping in another video, so we won't get into a lot of detail about it here, but it is an important consideration that can affect your final trap location. Here's a view of the front of the house at Site 2 as seen from my car, which was parked on the side of the road so I could see the trap. I've got the trap placed so that I could just barely see a cat inside the back of it because that end of the trap is just barely peeking out from behind the house here. In our video on trap observation, I mentioned bringing binoculars with you. This is a good example of when they would be handy because parking closer than I was would have been too unusual and would have been risking too many scary things that might keep the cat from going into the trap. Check out that video for more details on trap observation. This is just another view from my car, only zoomed in with my camera to show the trap peeking out from the side of the house. This was the only place I could put the trap and observe it during the trapping session, but still keep it mostly hidden from the street. Let's wrap up with another question to check your understanding. Which statement is false? Putting the trap in a travel route will increase the chance of cats seeing the trap. Cats often travel along fences. Next to a feeding station is a suitable trap location. It's a good idea to ignore curious people. Now pause the video, think about your answer, and then press play when you're ready to see what it is. Alright, did you choose D? This is the correct answer because it's usually not a good idea to ignore people that approach you while you're trapping. Like we talked about earlier, explain what you're doing as briefly as possible and politely as possible, and then ask people to leave the trap site so that you actually have a chance of trapping the cats that you're trying to trap. Alright, thanks for watching! That wraps up this video on identifying a trap location. I hope this was helpful, and best of luck with your trapping project.